My guest on this episode challenges us to reimagine leadership, not as control, but as care. She shares how, from a young age, she has stood up against injustice and broken through both literal and figurative glass barriers. As an immigrant woman of color, she speaks candidly about navigating systems that weren't built to hold her full voice. She introduces us to her 4 C's of leadership: courage, curiosity, creativity, and care, and reminds us that true leadership is rooted not in power over others, but in solidarity, imagination, and deeply held values. You're listening to the Courageous Public Health Podcast, Episode 10. To all the courageous Black, Indigenous, and women of color leading in public health, this podcast is your space to turn up the volume on your courage. This space centers your voice. This space celebrates your passion. This space amplifies your courage. My role? To listen, to amplify, and to stand with you in the fight for equity. My name is Dr. Christy McClamrock. I'm an epidemiologist, consultant, the founder and CEO of Courageous Public Health, and the host of the Courageous Public Health Podcast. Each week, I have unfiltered conversations with BIPOC women in public health about the challenges you face, the power you hold, and your vision for the future. We talk about the authenticity, vulnerability, and courage that you bring, not just to public health, but to every part of your lives. Because courage is about action, even in fear. It's about taking up space, leading unapologetically, refusing to be erased, and knowing you never have to do it alone. If you're ready to turn up the volume on your courage, if you're ready to take up space, if you're ready to smash the racist, patriarchal, cisnormative, heteronormative, ableist, capitalistic systems, then let's dive into this brand new episode. Thank you for joining me on this episode. I'd like to start by introducing myself if you're brand new to the podcast, or reintroducing myself if you're a returning listener. My name is Dr. Christy McClamrock, and I am the CEO of the Courageous Public Health Consulting Firm, where we support public health organizations through workshop design and facilitation and speaking engagements. I am so excited to introduce you to my guest on this episode. Let me formally introduce her, and then we'll jump right into our conversation. Born in Lima, Peru, Dr. Gabriela Alcalde is a creative, anti-supremacist leader with experience in the philanthropic, academic, governmental, nonprofit, and grassroots sectors. She writes and speaks locally, nationally, and internationally about shifting the philanthropic and nonprofit sectors, culture change, racial justice, and leadership of women of color. She earned a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Louisville, a master's in public health from Boston University, and a doctorate in global public health from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Go Tar Heels. What Your Comfort Costs Us is her first book. Let's connect my conversation with Dr. Gabriela Alcalde right now. Well, I'm really excited about our guest today. This is Gabriela Alcalde. Gabriela, welcome to the Courageous Public Health Podcast.
Thank you so much, Christy. Really happy to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm gonna immediately do a shout out to Bronwyn Lucas, who
Yay.
connected us. So big thank you to Bronwyn, because I think we have a lot to talk about.
Yes, absolutely.
So I would love for you to start by introducing yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Gabriela, and I am a public health professional who's been working in philanthropy for a bit over a decade, but I still always define myself as a public health professional first, because I feel like that really shapes how I see the world and how I engage with anything in my work and my personal life, frankly. I'm also a mother. I'm an immigrant, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, and I'm a middle-aged woman trying to find my way through this crazy world.
Me too. I love it. Yeah. Yeah. It's so great to think about all the things that we get to be, all the things that we are.
All the multitudes of us.
Yes. And embrace them all. That's great. Well, I think we should just jump right in because there's so much good stuff to talk about. So my first question for you is about courage. So just to remind everyone that bravery is taking action without fear, while courage is taking action despite fear. And I would love to hear from you some experiences from your personal life, your professional life, where you've acted courageously.
Yeah, I love that question. I've always sort of felt that my way of engaging with fear was to stand in it and just like really immerse myself in it. What I'm going to share is something that I didn't think I would do, which is I recently published a book. And as an introvert, it takes getting through some discomfort. And the courage is actually within the book. So, writing the book, I think just having sort of centering myself in that way was uncomfortable, but the courage was around sharing the stories that I share in the book and bringing the courage of other women of color leaders. The book is called What Your Comfort Costs Us: How Women of Color Leaders Transform Workplace Culture. Yay! Thank you.
There it is. For those of you watching the video, yes, here is the book. I'm partway through it. So
thank you, Christy. And I think that the book really is about courage. And how much vulnerability and courage are really two sides of the same coin. And I talk about the 4 C's of how to lead in the workplace, and courage, curiosity, creativity, and care. And I don't think you can be a good leader. I don't think you can be a leader at all if you are not willing to be courageous. And that is highly uncomfortable. And that's part of what we're called to do, is to push beyond our comfort, push into the discomfort, which is where creativity starts to sizzle and, things start to be able to change. I think as a woman of color, and all the women of color that I've spoken to, frankly, it takes courage just to step into the workplace every single day because the systems are not made for us. And certainly the concept of leadership was never intended for women or non-binary folks, but certainly not for those of us at the intersection of minoritized gender and racial identities. So to some degree, there is a degree of courage that you have to kind of put on every morning to walk into situations where you're constantly pushing against the current just by being yourself, just like moving in the world in a way that is natural, just by bringing my lens as an immigrant who was raised in a collectivist perspective, for example, instead of an individualistic one. So for me, there is a degree to which courage is required every single day when I show up to work, every single day when I engage in the world with my fullness and try to be as big as I actually am and not contort myself to meet the expectations or perceptions of others.
Yeah, this idea of, almost having to put on a cloak of courage. Yeah. Right? When you walk in the door for work, but also, really every time you step out of your house. Mm-hmm. I think that, okay. I read the prologue of your book. I mentioned this to you. No, was it the prologue? The foreword. Let's see. Yeah, it was the foreword. And you have this great story about yourself as a 6-year-old girl in Peru. And that's like, you had that cloak of courage at 6 years old. Do you want to say something about that story? Because I found it so powerful.
Yeah, as I was writing the book, and I was writing the book during the pandemic, so I was at home a lot. And I think various parts of me were coming out because there weren't too many places we could go. And 6-year-old me is one of the parts that is often present. I sometimes think to myself, what would 6-year-old me think about who I am now and what I am doing and the decision? And specifically, the story that I share in the book is from a birthday party that I, really remember being so excited. My parents had purchased this small swing set that we had in our patio, and I was so excited that we were going to be able to play on it during the birthday party. And the boys at the party decided to lock the girls out, and I was not going to put up with that. So I knocked on the door with all the other little girls and tried to convince them to open the door. And when they didn't, I just so clearly remember something in my body just rising and just feeling like, absolutely not. I'm not going to go cry. I am not going to just put up with this. I'm not going to not get to play in the swings with my friends. And so I punched through one of the little squares of glass in the door that separated the kitchen from the patio and just reached around and opened it up and just walked in. By this point, blood running down my arm, but feeling triumphant. And I remember the feeling of that just isn't fair. And, I think for me, as for so many people that I've met who've gone into public health, we were attracted to public health because it is about the common good. It is about what is fair for everybody, and what is fair for each of us is going to be slightly different. So how do you create a society? How do you create an institution or just a space, a culture that can treat different people fairly? And that's why that story has stayed with me, because that was the motivation. Yes, I wanted to get on the swings, but what really fired me up to punch through the glass was, this is not fair, and we should not have to put up with something that is not fair. And if there is something we can do, we should absolutely do it. So I think that's what's prompted me to be a leader. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm an introvert. I would be very happy sort of in the background, writing and researching, and sort of moving things in the background. But that's not been really an option for me. And I believe that that's what so many women of color have experienced, that becoming a leader wasn't really a choice. It wasn't really an option, because the issues that we work on are personal. They're affecting our lives every day. They're affecting our families, our communities. They tap into our sense of justice in a way that we cannot remain silent. We cannot remain seated waiting for somebody else to do it. There is no hero that's going to come save us. So that's why I started the book with that story, because that was who I was centering in writing the book. Was I am honoring, for whatever reason, the ancestors, my parents, whatever gave me that sort of courage from very young age. I'll say, my siblings are that way too. So thank you to my parents for not squelching that in us. And I wanted to center that as the reason that I chose to write the book, and to amplify not just my story, but the story of other women of color leaders.
That's beautiful. So when I asked you to introduce yourself in the beginning, and you listed various things that you are also that 6-year-old little girl. I think you also had an example of courageousness in your professional life specifically. Do you want to share that?
Yeah. One of the things that as I was preparing to come on the podcast and thinking about public health, I served on a board of health for 6 years, and I was vice chair. And I remember reading the newspaper one morning, and in this tiny, tiny little corner, seeing the story about how the public hospital in the community where I lived was going to be taken over through a merger. And the company that was going to take over was going to be doing away with a lot of the services, especially for lower income communities. And because it was a religious institution, it was also not going to be providing reproductive health services, and it was not going to honor certain relationships that it did not I did not see as intimate partners. So I was shocked. I remember like having my tea in the morning and thinking, how are we not talking about this? So I took it to the Board of Health. I had a very supportive Board of Health chair. And so he and I talked about it, and we're like, well, this is going to be the agenda item. There was a lot of pushback, so much pushback. And there was a lot of like, who is this person? And just a lot of silencing. I was excluded from meetings. And it took a lot of courage and persistence. I mean, it took me repeatedly showing up, writing letters to the editor. We ended up hosting a community town hall forum where I was asked to be one of the people on the panel, where I was actually speaking in opposition to this, and the hospital administrators were there. It was, again, not something I really wanted to do, yet I felt like if nobody else was stepping up to make the point, this is the responsibility you take on when you say that you're a public health leader. So to me, there was no stepping aside or saying, well, somebody else should do it. And that took a lot of courage because there was so much pushback. I would go into meetings and people would just pretend I wasn't there. I would have people who call me or email me and say, like, what are you doing? Like, this is a really important, like, economic thing we're doing. And I said, we can't compromise on the health and well-being on certain aspects of our community for financial gains. I did not make myself very popular. And I'm really proud of it. I'm really proud that, and so the merger did end up going through with some changes because of all the pushback that came from my speaking up through the Board of Health. And a few years later, the whole thing fell apart. And I actually had a few people call me years later and say, we should have listened. You said this would happen. And I wish that were the only time that had happened in my life, Christy, but that it hasn't been. It's happened many times where I have asked a question truly out of curiosity. And there has been just like this avalanche of silencing. Like, don't talk about that. Don't push back. That is not your role. That is not your place. And I've had that happen even within workplaces, where I've been silenced within the workplace, outside of the workplace. And it is repeatedly what has launched me into leadership roles, is just realizing that there aren't that many immigrants, there aren't that many women of color who get to be at tables where you have these conversations. And so while it has at time felt like a burden to have that responsibility, to have to speak on behalf of others, when like I just want to go home. I just want to go home and take my shoes off and read a book. When you do have the privilege and to be in those leadership spaces, whether it's a Board of Health or in a committee or any board or just in a workplace that is supposed to be of service to the community, you have to speak up. You have to speak up. And so I feel like at least once or twice a year in my life, there's been an opportunity where I've had to ask myself, what am I going to do here? And inevitably that 6-year-old little girl comes through and says, well, you know what you have to do. You have to speak up. Like, you know what's right. You know what's just. You know what's fair. And that is what you have to do.
You're breaking through it's not the glass ceiling, but it's the glass paint, the pane of glass in the door. It's like you have to, you got to break through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, it gets easier each time that you do it. And so to our listeners who are like, oh, I don't think I could do that. Believe me, I'm not only an introvert, but I was very shy as a child. I hated speaking in public. So, when things would require speaking in front of groups, I would say, oh God, I really, really don't want to do that. And again, there was that 6-year-old girl that would say, you don't have a choice. It's not about you anyway. And I think that for me, that's a big part, and that's a big theme in the book, that for the women of color that I interviewed, and for me, leadership is not a solo endeavor. It is a collective effort. So I am simply speaking, the voice of community is speaking through me. So when I do speak up, when I do have the courage to go against whether it's an organization or a group of people or simply the mainstream way of seeing something or understanding, it's not about me. It is because I am speaking on behalf, I'm amplifying the voices of others. And that is what drives me to repeatedly step into that fear and to overcome it with courage. Because I do believe in being a responsible member of community and being of service for the communities that we care about, whether we belong to them or are new to them. We all are interdependent with each other. So in the end, we're all responsible for each other.
Yeah. And this is related to the next question, which you've certainly addressed, but, that courage isn't just about taking action despite fear. It's about claiming and expressing your power.
Yes.
Especially in those spaces that don't always welcome it. And yeah, that's also what that little Gabriela did, right? It wasn't just to take action despite fear. It was expressing her power.
Yeah.
And I love that the interviews that you did for the book, that a lot of the women and people that you interviewed also talk about how they claim and express their power.
Yeah, a theme from the interviews was about how we embody power.
Yes.
And that power, there was a distinction between power over and power with, and also power within. And I think you have to find that power within. You have to connect with that in order to really be able to express what power with is, a solidarity. And that's the type of leadership that the book is about. And it is about embodying that in a way that we recognize that while, I have 2 graduate degrees, so clearly I am interested and committed to education, and I have been rewarded and for my intelligence. Yet I believe that my knowing and my power come from all my senses, come from all the experiences I have, not just my formal education. They come from my cultural upbringing. They come from my experience as a mother. They come from the way that I've learned to cook and respect the ingredients that come, that are available to us. There's just so much that we can learn from our interactions with each other and with other animals and just with nature. That I believe have really shaped and informed how I lead and how I lead with, by creating space and not thinking about power as a positive or a negative. Much like relationships can be healthy, they can be unhealthy, right? They are essential because we are social beings and we're all interconnected. Power is much the same way. I think sometimes we tend to talk about power in this sort of aggressive way, in this very solo, individual who wields it and uses it. I think you can be with power and in power, and it's more of that tapping into what is needed in the moment, in that space, and standing in that. Not shrinking, not letting fear back you away from your values. So for me, power without being rooted in values is abuse. It's violence. But when you tap into that power rooted by your values, the values that are held in your community, then you're amplifying what is good for all of us. And I don't believe that there's a zero sum. I don't believe that when one of us does better, somebody else gets less. I believe, and there's certainly much evidence to show, that we have an abundance on Earth, and there's enough for all of us. The way that we exist right now does not make that seem feasible, and yet it is. And so for me, power is about tapping into our values and constantly sort of like, it's almost feels like you're almost like tripping all the time, because you're constantly trying to find your balance, and that balance will be different depending on the moment in time. And that's leadership for me. It is alive. It is constantly moving. And it does not always require the same approach. It depends on what's happening around you and what your community needs from you.
I love that you're bringing this back to values. I know our listeners have heard me say before that I also like to go back to my values, and thinking of leadership and power in the context of values is that's a really, I don't know if it's a new way to think about leadership, but it's a new way for me to think about leadership that really resonates. I actually, for my 50th birthday, talking about being a middle-aged woman, for my 50th birthday, I got a tattoo, and it has 4 words. It's the shape of a abstract shape of a woman's body, and there are 4 words, and I refer to them as my vision for my life, but it's absolutely, they're also my values, and it's courage, freedom, connection, and kindness. So I have this tattoo on my forearm, and it's like, everything I do, I want to go back and center myself on those 4 things. And I think that does, I think that does help me. It helps me be courageous, and it helps me, embody my own power. And that's one of the things that I'm really loving about doing this podcast, is just offering some space to BIPOC women to talk about that. I mean, there's not enough space. There's not enough space. And, I think people often, you have to create your own space, but I feel like, as a white woman, I can also create space.
Yeah. And that's solidarity. I mean, I think that's what solidarity is about recognizing, understanding, and acting upon the fact that we're interdependent and our fates are intertwined. There is no limit to what we can do for each other. And that's, again, just to come back to public health. I mean, public health attracted me because it's values driven.
Yes.
Right? It is an essential aspect of our society, from clean air and clean water to, food that is regulated, to vaccines. Absolutely. The many millions and millions and millions of lives that have been saved, to seat belts, to tobacco. I mean, just like public health is so huge. And it's all based on values. It's based on the value of mitigating suffering and preventing harm. If there is a harm that is preventable, then it should be prevented. And we can do that through policies. We can do that through our structures. And that's what I love about public health. It helped me to engage with the world in a way that helped me understand that structures, including the processes and the institutions that we have, hold the culture and hold our belief systems. They hold our values. And so if institutions and systems and structures are not serving us, we need to ask ourselves, what values are they rooted in? And we can create new structures. We can create new institutions and new ways of relating to each other by starting with our values. So I love what you were saying. Like, I think that we've lost that. We've gotten stuck on these models of leadership that were about the individual And we forgot what it was really about. It is about manifesting and acting on our values. It is about having someone who is more of an orchestra director than a superhero. You know, it's all necessary. And as a leader, you get to the privilege of holding space and to attuning and aligning so that it's always in service of the values that we have collectively chosen. And I think we're pretty lost right now on that. We've forgotten to ask ourselves, is this action, is this policy, is this institution, is this program, is this concept actually true to the values that we claim to care about?
I love in the book that you take the time to define what some of these systems are, these existing systems, patriarchal system, white supremacy system, you know, and I think that's really, really useful because in your definitions, it's very clear that those things do not align with the values of many of us, right? And certainly with many of us in public health and everyone doing the work of diversity, equity, inclusion. And it's like, we know that we know that it's not right. We know that it doesn't feel right. We know that it's not fair. And it's like, but yes, let's tap into what those values are. And then that's the direction that we want to move in. So that actually leads me to my next question. I want to hear about your vision for the future. I want to hear about looking ahead for you. And we can, talk about that in terms of public health, in terms of, BIPOC communities, immigrant Latino communities, how you see immigrant Latinos shaping these futures. And then we'll get to it. But I also really want to hear what your personal vision is for the future. Yeah.
I think right now I'm thinking pretty big because there's so much that needs addressing. I am someone that at heart believes most people are not cruel, nor do most people intend cruelty. That doesn't mean that the impact of many of our actions do not result in cruelty and violence, but I do not believe that most humans actually intend to cause harm. So what I hope for the future, what I see for the future is a total reimagining. I think we've been in a spiral, and at some point, rather than saying, let's go back to anything, like there's no going back, and let's not live in the ruins of it either. Right now for me is the time to be using our imagination, to be dreaming. Like, let's actually start to imagine what a world could be like that is truly built on the values that most of us share, that most of us relish, that most of us guide our daily lives by, regardless of what your political, religious, or otherwise identification is. Most humans still care about similar things. You want your loved ones to be healthy. You want them to have their basic needs met. You want to have joy in your life. You want to prevent pain and suffering as much as possible. These are all common human desires. And I think we can tap into that shared humanity and use our imagination to move beyond where we've been stuck. Because I think we've been stuck. And we have been sort of spinning our wheels in these systems that are all quite exclusionary and supremacist. And I, often define myself as an anti-supremacist leader, because to me, I don't care who is at the top of that pyramid. The pyramid is what's wrong. I don't want a supremacist structure, regardless of who is where. That structure in and of itself is what causes harm. So what I hope is that we can use our imagination to upend and to leave behind these frameworks and structures that have caused us harm for hundreds and hundreds of years, and that have lost their utility. They serve no one well, because even those who are advantaged in some material way are compromising their humanity through these systems. So I really do believe that these supremacist systems, whether it's patriarchy or racism, whatever it is, they are harming all of us. So my interest in moving beyond them is out of compassion and care for all of us.
I love that you're thinking big. I'm glad that you said that. I'm thinking big. Good. That's what we need. That's absolutely what we need. And what about your personal vision? Gabriela, what's next for you?
I don't know yet, but I do know that I need to listen to myself and to that 6-year-old and to remain curious. So that's where I am. I am remaining curious. And I really actually loved the process of writing the book. I didn't know it was a book until I'd already written quite a bit. And as I had shared with you, so I know you're in your own process, is, I had written the whole thing before I even reached out to a publisher. But I really loved it. There's something about the creative process, and for many of us, just with work and families, you just don't have time for that creative space. And so one thing that I will, instead of being really big, I'm actually going small for my own vision, is I want to commit to myself to continue to make space for creativity, however small that might be. Maybe it's in cooking something that I've not done before, experimenting with different ingredients, or maybe it's, I'm going to go out and get myself a guitar again after not playing it for many years. But I used to love it as a teenager and in my 20s. So creativity, that's my vision, is that's how I'm going to remain healthy and optimistic, maybe not hopeful. Is because there is creativity, and I'm going to continue to lean into that.
So the 4 C's, right?
Courage, creativity, curiosity, and care.
Beautiful. I have another forearm that's got some space on it. So,
I love it. I think they're very similar, actually, very aligned with yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Gabriela, I really appreciate you coming on today. And this has been a fascinating conversation, and I'm really excited to finish your book. And I will make sure that there's information about that in our show notes. I also wanted to just ask you, what is the best way for our listeners to connect with you, to learn more about you, more about your book, and more about your courage?
Yeah. Thank you. So I do have a website, and I know you'll be sharing it, but it is just mgalcalde.com. And you can learn more about my book there, as well as myself. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can look me up on LinkedIn, find me there. And I do want to encourage your listeners to just check the book out. It's I wrote it as a gift, and because I really believe these are stories that can help open our minds and open our hearts. So I extend the gift not just for myself, but from all the women who shared their stories with me. And I hope that you will all become curious about our stories and learn beyond your own experience.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was a transformative conversation. Dr. Alcalde reminds us that courageous leadership begins with values, and that power rooted in care, curiosity, and community can create real, lasting change. I just want to say I'm so inspired by 6-year-old Gabriela breaking through glass for what was right. And I'm equally moved by the Gabriela of today, still breaking barriers with clarity, conviction, and compassion. You can connect with Dr. Alcalde on LinkedIn to learn more about her and her courage. All the links to connect with her are on our show notes page for this episode, located on our website, courageouspublichealth.com, under episode 10. Before you return to your day, think of someone in your life who would be moved by this conversation, and take a moment to share this episode with them. If you're listening on a podcast app, you can send it via text or share directly to social media. And if you're on our website, the sharing buttons make it easy to spread the word. Thanks so much for being here. Until our next episode, stay courageous. Thank you for listening to the Courageous Public Health Podcast. Visit courageouspublichealth.com to find the show notes for each episode and learn how to connect with us.